Our Western values, traditions, and history are under attack. How can we save the foundations of our great country? Today's guest has the answers. Stay tuned. Today's podcast is sponsored by AMAC. You know how much I love AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens, the only conservative alternative to that other group. Join today at amac.us/Carter. Hey folks, I've got Spencer Klavan today on the show. He is joining the Sara Carter Show because I think this subject is something that we are all talking about. How do we save our nation? How do we save America? And Spencer Klavan has just written a book. It's called How to Save the West, Ancient Wisdom for 5 Modern Crises. We need this book. And now more than ever, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Speaking of fighting the forces that are hurting the West, I'll also share an op-ed that I wrote for foxnews.com. Go to foxnews.com. It's about Sara Huckabee Sanders, her rebuttal to President Biden. And I truly believe it was a phenomenal speech. And it was one, once again, that hit home. It's exactly what we are thinking about. Her response to President Biden's State of the Union perfectly captured the battle of our time. I believe that. And it's worthy of a deep dive. We're going to talk about that. And finally, the Washington Examiner has totally blown the cover off of a private disinformation tracking group that is destroying the ability of non-mainstream sources, i.e. me and everyone else, to keep their doors open, even the Washington Examiner. The First Amendment is under attack, folks, and we have to hold these groups accountable. We need to expose them because they are not doing this for your benefit. I think this is what Elon Musk called today when he said the woke Stasi, was rattled when the hearings were ongoing yesterday. And this story is one example of that. Hey, everyone, please follow and subscribe. Get all the links at saracarter.com. That's saracarter.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list so that you don't get shadow banned. Folks, we've got a new sponsor, a great sponsor, Donors Trust. Donors Trust is with the Sara Carter Show. They are a principled, tax-friendly way to simplify your charitable givings. And I'm going to tell you why this is so important. Because we saw what happened in our country to the, especially during the time of the IRS targeting the Tea Party, targeting groups that had patriot in their name. We saw the kind of weaponization of those groups, right? Against the American people. And in order to protect our money, in order to protect our charitable givings, we need to have some kind of privacy. We need to be able to give to groups that we absolutely believe in without having the worry that the government is going to come after you or come after those groups. So I say go to Donors Trust. Donors Trust is a principled, tax-friendly way of just giving money, whether it's saving unborn babies, empowering entrepreneurs to offer alternatives to failing public schools, or fighting green energy extremists that want to consolidate power. Donors Trust is the charitable giving account provider for you. Let my friends at Donors Trust help minimize your tax liability while maximizing your giving. So I want you to visit www.donorstrust.org/Sara. That's www.donorstrust.org/Sara. Again, that's www.donorstrust.org/Sara. So let's talk a little bit about Sara Huckabee Sanders, the governor of the beautiful state of Arkansas. And, she is someone who has literally been up against the worst of the worst in Washington, D.C. They have tried to go after her. They make fun of her. They fight her ideas. In fact, I saw after she did her rebuttal, I was stunned to see that some, New Yorker magazine, others writing opinion editorials saying that it was Sara Huckabee Sanders who is crazy. This is the gaslighting that the left loves to do. This is exactly how the left operates. They are terrified of Governor Huckabee Sanders. They are terrified of her. You want to know why? Because she's right. because she's not afraid to stand up to them and tell the truth. So I was so moved by her speech. I know her, by the way. It's really funny. We went to an event. It was before COVID, and I remember seeing her at this event, and we were both wearing like the exact same color dress, almost the exact same style. It was like a hot pink dress, and she's so funny because she had gone up on stage to talk, and that night I wasn't on stage. It was another night that I was on stage, but she came up to me and we were laughing, and we did a little selfie together. And I thought that was pretty funny. She took it very nicely. We didn't call each other at all or set that up. We're not that good of friends, but we just kind of wore the same exact dress. But I got to tell you, I have so much respect for Sara, because she is telling the truth, and she's speaking for us as families and for our nation. And here's a little bit about what I wrote. I said, Governor Sanders is right. The division in our nation is not between Democrats and Republicans, but it is a war to save our nation's values. It is a choice between normal and crazy. And she is right. You know, as soon as I started seeing all those responses from the left back at Sara to Sara's rebuttal, I thought to myself, they must think we're idiots, right? They must think that the American public, that we are just complete idiots and we are going to buy their bullshit hook, line, and sinker. You want to know what's crazy? Sam Brinton, who headed the nuclear waste program for the United States government, that guy is crazy. They're so desperate. They are so desperate, the left, to just ignore what is normal, to make us feel bad because we want to have families or we want to go to church. Oh, you go to church? Oh, you must be insane. But then you got people like Sam Brinton wearing electric green lipstick with an electric green dress, standing in an office that controls our nuclear waste, and that's okay. And that's okay. You have Biden making a speech and saying like words we didn't even understand. Words we didn't even understand. And I even posted that up on my Twitter account. I can't even remember. He was trying to say something about we're not going to raise the fabuloso taxes or whatever that was. And the left just stands up and applauds him. We didn't even know what that was. And they were giving him a standing ovation. You've got Rachel Levine, yes, who's heading human health, right? The Secretary for Health, Rachel Levine, discusses LGBTQ health at Yale Law. Like everybody in the world is like, Rachel Levine, this guy, who, by the way, doesn't look that healthy, is in charge of our health. They think we're idiots. You know, they tell us they're gonna like force our children to learn CRT, critical race theory. And they don't expect us to stand up to that. In Maryland right now, there is a bill, literally a bill on the table right now. I don't know if it'll pass. That they want to be able to vaccinate your children without your consent. That as long as your kids understand that they are being vaccinated and understand the pros and cons, this is a child, that they should be able to do that without your consent. They do not want your consent at school to put filthy books in in the grasp of like an elementary school student talking about all kinds of sexual deviancy. I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm not saying throw the book down a memory hole. I'm saying don't teach our kids that. They think we're just going to turn our heads at the fact that the border is wide open and we've got fentanyl pouring across the borders, killing our children. And Biden sits up there like, we've got this much, we've sequestered this much fentanyl coming through the border and this many people. Let me tell you something, folks. He is lying to you. The border is so terrible And our lives are in danger because the Biden administration literally reversed all the policies at the border that President Trump had in place. Yes, he did. And he left it wide open. And guess what? Now they took down our ability with the balloons that we had on the border, not the Chinese balloons, the actual US balloons. We've actually downed those so that you will never know the truth about how many known gotaways have come into the country while they turn their heads. But they expect us to believe their lies. They gaslight us. They make fun of people that we support, normal people. Sara Huckabee Sanders, Governor Huckabee Sanders, first female governor in Arkansas, the youngest governor, a true heroine, in my opinion, standing up for what's right, which is just, if you think about it, so insane because it's just the stuff we would have stood up for anyways, for our children, to be more actively involved in our kids' lives and to know what they're being taught. And Sara Huckabee is like, look, you know what I'm going to do? I am not going to allow the left to indoctrinate our children here in the state of Arkansas. Oh, she's insane. And then you have all these parents that are so desperate to be needed. They have, what is that? Munchausen syndrome by proxy, whatever it is. They want to be a star of the left. They will put their little boys in dresses and their little girls in dress up as men, just so that they can be stars on social media. And that's supposed to be normal. And then if you say anything about that, if you say, wow, this just is not normal. This is just not something that we should be okay with. Right? Just like when we point out the fact like that these kids are going to these events where, transgenders and transvestites are dancing and stripping in front of them, and that little kids are putting dollars in, these women who are men's underwear, and we're supposed to be like, oh, that's normal. That's fine. That is not fine. Sara Huckabee was laying out like her plan, as governor for the great state of Arkansas, saying, we're already winning battles in Arkansas. She signed executive orders to ban CRT, racism, and indoctrination in the schools, eliminate the use of the derogatory term Latinx. Thank you. Because I am not a Latinx. I don't even know where that came from in our government. Repealed COVID orders and said never again to authoritarian mandates and shutdowns. That is normal. That is common sense. What's been happening in our country is almost as if we have been giving up our control, our common sense. I don't know if it's out of guilt, out of worry. We're such kind people. We don't want to call a spade a spade. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But we have literally given the crazies. Let's go back to normal versus crazy. We have literally been giving the crazies the insane control of the institution. And we wonder why our children are so desperately upset, so unhappy, right? And so confused. Because we as adults have literally given our rights, given our voices away to this insanity. Instead of standing up and defending our children and being the grown-ups. Yes, we have to be grown-ups. We can't just do whatever we want. We can't just take whatever we want. Right? It's not all about us. It's about the future of our country. It's about our children. We need to defend our children against the insanity. And the only way to do that, folks, and it is the reason why I wrote this op-ed and stood right by Sara Huckabee's side on this. I stood by Governor Huckabee Sanders' side because I absolutely believe that if we do not stand up and speak out publicly and defend our children, we will lose our nation and we'll lose our families. And we cannot afford to lose that. We just can't. Folks, Allegiance Gold is a new sponsor for this podcast, for the Sara Carter Show, and I'm so grateful that they are. Gold and silver allow you to protect what you have worked so hard for and give you back the control and privacy that you need. And because reputation is very important to me, the only company I recommend is Allegiance Gold. Right now, you can get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sara sent you. Get $5,000 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them that Sara sent you. So don't wait. Call or click today, 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, SARA, or go to protectwithsara.com. That's protectwithsara.com. We can't control the Biden administration, but we can prepare. 877-702-7272. That's 877-702-SARA, SARA, or protectwithsara.com. So excited. I'm so happy to have Spencer Klavan on the show. He is a scholar, a podcaster, and author of How to Save the West, Ancient Wisdom for 5 Modern Crises. He earned his doctorate at Oxford University in ancient Greek literature. Really? Spencer, that's amazing. Like when I read that, I was like, Oxford. And I got to tell you why, because my youngest, my 10-year-old, she already wants to go there. And I said, well, Annalise, how did you know about Oxford? She said, well, I looked on the internet. What university looks more like Harry Potter, like where they went to school? And it was Oxford. So thank you for coming on.
Maximally Hogwarts. That's right.
Exactly.
Oh, that's so funny.
I know it is. It is. I mean, kids are great, but I'm very glad that she's aspiring to the highest levels, because I think it would be amazing if she would go to Oxford. So tell me a little bit about yourself before we get here, because this is a very intense book, and your life. You know, every time I say someone picks a topic to write about, I mean, this becomes like not only the love of your life, the book, but it also becomes something like a quest. You know what I mean? Some people tell me when they write books, it's almost like giving birth. You just can't wait to get it over with. You just can't wait to get the book out. You know, it's what led you to write this book? How to Save the West?
The other way that it's kind of like giving birth, I hear, is that afterward you forget how painful it was and you want to do it again. But this is
so true. So true. I've heard that too.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked about my life, because we were off mic a little earlier. We were chatting about the experience of growing up in a house full of books and how lucky that makes us. And you were saying that you're giving your kids that experience, and that I kind of grew up thinking, well, doesn't everybody just love books? How could you not love the chance to get face to face with the past, you know, to have these voices preserved from in some cases, millennia ago, centuries and centuries ago. And that passion has always been the drive of my life. Even sometimes when I didn't recognize it, it was always what was leading me forward, was this deep conviction that the past has something to say to the present. And there's so much in this world right now, there's so much messaging to the contrary. I call this kind of chronological chauvinism in the book, the idea that that new just always means better. And all the good answers were sort of thought up to all the big questions, sometime shortly after Charles Darwin, basically. And everything before that is like wrong. And I just knew from experience that wasn't true, that some of my best friends are books, which sounds a little sad, but like, you know, some of my closest first companions were men and women from centuries way, way before our modern era. And as I grew up and I started to learn more about the world and started to go to those schools that you mentioned, I came gradually to realize that there is a pervasive narrative that actually people from the past are backward and they're primitive, and maybe it's even a little bit racist in some way or another to talk about things like the West. Doesn't that just mean white people? And that's never been what I mean by the West at all. I don't think that's right at all. When I talk about the West, I'm talking about the cultural heritage of Athens and Jerusalem,
Right.
these two great civilizations, which have so much to teach us. We look at the news and we think well, everything's falling apart and all of these problems are so new. The digital technology, the problems that we're having about sex and gender. And actually what I wanted to say to people, the quest that kind of came out of this whole life story was some of the deepest problems we're up against actually aren't new. And what that means is that there is wisdom available to us in the records of the past if we'll just turn to it. It's really important for us to realize that we're not alone in the fights that we're up against, that there is actually a whole kind of history of dealing with these sorts of questions. And I wanted to give people an inroad to that in the book.
I think that's really brilliant. I think about, I was just looking on Twitter, and I'm going to diverge here for just 1 second. And
Totally. Always love a
last
Twitter
night,
digression.
Elon Musk said, the woke Stasi just got, shook up yesterday because of all the hearings on Capitol Hill. And this idea of the weaponization of our, of our bureaucracies, and this idea that we can erase as well, the memory hole, 1984, Orwell, just throw everything down a memory hole and pretend it never happened. Well, that's a very dangerous way of thinking. And that eliminates, what you're saying is our ability to go into the past. And I absolutely love that. I'm reading The Lost City of Z, David Grant, and that quest, to find this lost city that they made into a movie and everything. But if you read the book, or you read, I'm sure you read ancient literature, or Socrates or Plato, or, ancient writings, maybe even from you talk about Judea, but I don't know if you read Aramaic or anything like that, but there are lessons to be learned from our ancestors and from our ancestral civilizations, right? I mean,
totally.
we're not like the newest thing on the block. It's like I tell my kids, it's like, hey, you weren't the only one with that problem. We all had that problem, right?
It's exactly like that. It's exactly like falling in love for the first time and you think you're inventing all of your problems. You're like, oh my gosh, it just feels like I have to be with this person. And then you talk to somebody that's even just a little bit older and they're like, yeah, that's literally everybody. And that's kind of at a civilizational level, that's kind of the experience we're going through with a lot of this stuff.
Right.
I mean, you brought up a great example, which is the memory hole, right? I talk about this in the book as the reality crisis, the crisis of is anything true or false, or is it just kind of whatever the going narrative decides today? And I end up by the middle of that section in Plato's cave. You mentioned the great Greek philosopher Plato, and in book 7 of his Republic, he tells a story that is basically the first virtual reality dystopia. Like, it's the first time that I know of that anybody had that thought of like, what if we're actually all in a simulation, basically? And it's really telling, I think, that he begins that Western philosophy, in some sense, at least Greek philosophy, really begins with this very question. So there's that experience of being like, oh, okay, maybe Mark Zuckerberg and the metaverse isn't the first time this question has come up or the only way that we have to deal with these sorts of questions. Maybe we can turn to somebody like Socrates, who says, actually, either something is true, whether you want it to be true or not. Either there is such a thing as absolute truth, Or it's really all just power. It's all just sort of my truth is stronger than your truth, and you have to use my pronouns, and you can't say that, so I'm going to shut you off of social media. I mean, those are very old questions. One reference I make in the book is to the invention of the printing press, which came along with a very similar kind of reaction. You know, don't print those books because they're dangerous. Don't let them out into the world. And ultimately, I think, you know, the comforting thing about reality, about true and false, is that you can't wish them away, that they're not going to just dissolve into nothing because somebody promises you that if you put on a pair of VR goggles, you know, you can transform the world. The trick is just not to fall for it, right? And that's what these texts are so good at. They're really good at kind of giving you a ground to stand on as you go forward into, you know, thinking about how to use the tech well and how to answer these questions well.
Well, I think you brought up, and I'm going to go right into what the 5 crises you mentioned in your book are, because I think everybody, I'm going to say it again, How to Save the West. You need to get this book. I think it's brilliant, but I want to go back to that because I think that's important. What you bring up something that, to me, if you would have told me 10 years ago that back then I would have thought of liberals differently, you know, or Democrats or more of the left-leaning media would be all gung-ho about censoring books or ideas or thoughts, or, you know, and that there would be this middle ground of like this vague truth, right? Like we can all jump into it. I'm supposed to call you a girl if you feel like you're a girl. I'm supposed to call you a hippopotamus if you think you're a hippopotamus. You know, I would have said, no way. No way.
Yeah.
They're not going to get that far. It can't be this crazy because I, like you, I am learned and I know they are too. I mean, they're just not going to fall for this, but they did. And they are.
Totally.
And they have.
Well, yeah.
And then I'm going to jump into the 5. I promise you. I'm so interested in talking to you, Spencer, because I know you have a great grasp on this. But I just saw the Washington Examiner story. I've been talking about that as well, and about the fact that, you know, now we're seeing these, you know, specific organizations, nonprofits that are set up around the world to tackle quote unquote disinformation.
Right. My favorite of these terms now, you've got disinformation, you've got misinformation, and then have you heard of malinformation? It's
no,
like
I have not.
the new.
That's
Okay, this is like the new Pokemon. Like, have you acquired this one yet at the Poke Gym? But malinformation is where you say true things, but you use them wrong. You're using the truth wrong. So it's factually true that, gee, there sure seem to be a lot of people with developing sudden heart problems, especially kind of like young men. And maybe we should look into like the relationship between this. And it's like, that's malinformation. Because yeah, it's true, but you're using it for the wrong reasons. You're saying, and so this is like a great example of what you're talking about, that, yeah, even if, you know, 5 years ago, if you sort of said this stuff out loud, it would have been funny. Now you can't even like think of a joke that's crazy enough to make about it because it's all real. It's like the Babylon Bee can't churn out satirical headlines fast enough to keep up. And so
and they're like actually accurate in some cases.
Right.
In a
like when you're like
bizarre way. They're satirical, but yet I'm like, they're right about that.
Well, totally. It's like when you just said, you know, the hippopotamus pronouns. It's like, that's funny. It's also like basically real. I'm sure you can find somebody with hippopotamus pronouns on TikTok, you know?
Absolutely.
And so this is the state we're in.
A professor in Arizona at a university identified as a hippopotamus, true story. And
you didn't make that up? Because there you go. I thought you were kidding.
But right, okay. No, a professor at a university in Arizona and wrote a whole story about himself as being a hippopotamus. I'm like, I want every student to get their money back.
Didn't Shirley Temple have a whole song, I Want a Hippopotamus for Christmas? I'm vaguely now remembering where this is, talk about digression. But the one thing I will say about this phenomenon, the kind of the warp speed or light speed acceleration of it is that's one of the things that people find most difficult to understand because it seems to come out of nowhere. And this is one of the major advantages, I think, of looking at these questions from a longer historical perspective and thinking about them in terms of kind of fundamental questions that the West has been up against again and again. Because once you look at them that way, then you realize that it's actually not a sudden development. It's a very, very gradual development. And then something happens, like the digital revolution, for instance, all this new technology. And it's like you open the door on this process that's been going on for a long time, this kind of loss of confidence in absolute truth, this disconnection from our ancestral wisdom. There's that old joke, how did you go bankrupt? Very slowly and then all at once. And it's because the tendency is already there, and then there's some moment or some event where it suddenly just like clicks. And I think that's
triggering moment. I'm using a modern word, a trigger.
Yes.
You have triggered history. So let's talk about that. What are the 5 crises that you cover in the book? Give some examples of these and how these kind of crises manifest in the West, in the modern world.
Sure. So the first one we've already talked about, and that's the crisis of reality, which is anything true and false, whether I want it to be or not. And so examples of this include,
therefore I am.
I think, therefore I am. I mean, the real version of it is Hamlet, when he pretends to be mad, says there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I mean, in some ways, like Descartes was trying to grab a foothold against that, right? Like something that we can know that is absolutely true. But this idea that like everything is kind of in flux is the way that the ancient Greek philosophers would have put it. Heraclitus, for instance. We see this now in the idea of post-truth politics. We see it when Bill Clinton says it depends on what the meaning of is, right? The fake but accurate is one of these shibboleths you get that gets thrown around. But then you also see it in the virtual reality stuff, like a world beyond your world, something that you can construct that will be just as real as the experience of the here and now. And so addressing that crisis kind of leads on into the second crisis, which is the crisis of the body. Because if there is something true, and if there are such things as beauty and goodness that we, long for, that our souls connect with, then suddenly it becomes a big problem that we have these kind of ungainly bodies that break down and die. Like it's very uncomfortable to think that one day we're going to suffer pain and we might suffer from disease and all these terrible things that the world offers. And this is the crisis of the body that we see in my body is the wrong gender, my body is the wrong species, my body is maybe just too slow and weak altogether, and I should upload myself into some kind of robot consciousness. That's
what I was going to go to. That is, though, that is a very real, not the conscious part, but the real possibility that we will merge with machine. I mean, that is something that you constantly hear being tossed around by scientists. I mean, I love watching Discovery Science, so I'll see some of their and I'm on their show. So I am on What on Earth every once in a blue moon. I do a season there.
Cool.
But you hear about this. Talk a little bit about that, because before people may have thought it and they may have just imagined it, but now technology is making some of that possible.
Absolutely. And the thing is, that's only going to keep getting more true. We're going to develop more and more of this stuff. And that means we're going to be confronted with more and more questions about how we should use it. What's the right way and the wrong way to use these tools? And the word for what you're talking about, I'm sure you've kind of come up against it in some of these encounters, is transhumanism, which is actually just an extension of the extreme transgender idea. And that's something that I argue in the book, is that it's really not about the sex stuff, actually. That's the current focus, because it's very it's a very big deal in people's minds, and it does produce all sorts of horrible problems. But actually, the philosophy goes even further and deeper than that. You get people writing things like from transgender to transhuman, because if in fact your body is just this kind of accident, right? It's just something that you happen to be occupying. Then why should you stop at pretending that a man can transform into a woman just with language and surgery, right? Instead, you should keep going. A man should become a robot. A man should become a hippopotamus. I mean, all of these things the tech is kind of newly there to do them. And so we are suddenly asking ourselves, well, why shouldn't we? And the answer that I give in the book comes from Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. It's called hylomorphism. And it's a different way of thinking about yourself, which I argue is just healthier, saner, and will make you happier. So that hylomorphism is the idea that we're souls in bodies, that our souls are not kind of ghosts in the machine or something. They are actually embodied forms, which we live out in the here and now. And we see this when it's like, can you be virtuous without doing physical actions in real life that are good? And no, you can't, right? So there's something actually essential to our human form that makes us what we are. And preserving a sense of that can help us to make decisions about, well, okay, why is it that technology, which helps blind people to see, why would that be different from technology that puts horns on your head and turns you into something that looks like a demon? And the answer is because one of them is enhancing and restoring your true humanity, that is leading you into your humanity, and the other is distorting it. And this is a very, a good first step, I think, to recovering sanity in this area.
Do you think that because we have drifted so far away from that, and I am completely in agreement with you, by the way, that our humanity is beautiful and incredible just the way it is, just the way we are. I think our bodies, the way they're made, the way we have survived as human beings throughout time is incredible and miraculous in and of itself.
Yep.
But we've strayed so far away from that essential belief. Do you think that actually causes the increase that we're seeing in children suicides, in the actions people are taking on their own physical self, like mutilating their bodies? I saw that gentleman in France who is trying to become a reptilian alien. I don't even know what that is. He's trying to be one with Star Trek or something, but but these mutilations of their physical body. And sometimes I think that lack of respect for life in and of itself, whether that be, I eat meat, but do I love animals? Would I treat them do I treat it with respect? Do I think of it as like a miraculous gift? And yes, I do. So, but do you think because we've walked away from that, we're seeing all of this unhappiness and seeing that unhappiness in our youth and in our society? It's that, I'm just asking you as a philosopher.
No, I think you're really onto something. And I think sometimes it can be difficult for conservatives or even just people in general, don't have to be hard right-wingers or whatever, but you get confronted with this stuff and you want to be compassionate, but you also want to say the truth. And it can be hard to kind of carve that path for yourself. And I think one big advantage of these ancient realities is it helps us to see that this is a hard problem. It's hard to be in bodies. It's hard. It's a terrible tragedy that eventually we die. And so what you're saying is true. We are kind of a miracle, just exactly as we are. We are also, I think, living in a fallen world, and that's very painful. And so you want to say, or I think it's true to say, that there is a natural problem here that we have to kind of face and overcome as we grow. At the same time, it's a very old idea that the way to fix this problem is to just get rid of the body altogether, or to treat it as a kind of dead weight. And that idea has been tested and failed. It actually makes us feel worse. It makes us more uncomfortable. It doesn't actually work. It ends us up in all kinds of contorted positions like the ones you're talking about. And so really the point here is, I see the problem. I get why you're hurting, but it doesn't actually help to do what you're doing. You're being sold a bill of goods. A lot of this comes out of the Judith Butler book, Gender Trouble, which is a book book that does this. It just divides the human being into two different things, to body and sort of spirit or gender or whatever. And I think that what that does is it doesn't just lead to all sorts of gender craziness. It leads to all the other stuff that you're talking about. It leads to pain and self-loathing, and in terrible cases to self-harm. So they'll come to you and they say, you know, trans kids are killing themselves because you won't let them do gender transition. And it's like, actually, if you look at the way this unfolds, it's just as likely, if not more likely, that what's happening is kids are starting to feel even more grossed out by their bodies because of what you're telling them about what humanity is, which is just false.
That's such a great point. What's number 3, the third crisis?
Number 3 is the crisis of meaning. And this is a really, I think, difficult one to get around because it's everywhere. I talk about it in art. I talk about it in culture. I talk about it in science. Everywhere we have this idea that what we're doing is somehow just like copying things, you know, like genes copy themselves and people copy themselves. Civilizations reproduce their ideas. And this really goes back in some ways to Richard Dawkins, the famous author of The Selfish Gene. And that is actually, again, an old idea. We get it, for instance, in Plato's Timaeus. But the problem that we're up against is that in order for that idea to work, the copies have to be copies of something. When you do art, for instance, you reproduce some depiction, but what are you depicting? What are you showing? There's something on the other side of that activity, or else you're just kind of messing around with like paint and clay. And that's kind of a lot of modern art is that. And so what I'm proposing in this section, this middle section, is there's a reason why our art kind of sucks, and why our culture feels kind of listless, and why so much of our science, which is amazing, is also kind of demoralizing. You see people at once saying, "Isn't it beautiful that, you know, we can know all of these things about nature?" And it is beautiful, and yet somehow those people also seem to be kind of sinking into despair, like there's no meaning to anything. Right. And the reason is that there has to be something behind and beyond all of this for it to work, for it to be something other than just constant imitation all the way down. And that's kind of what leads actually into the fourth crisis, which is, okay, if there's something beyond, that starts to sound a lot like God. And the G word is kind of a dirty word in scientific circles and in these parts of our culture, because it's sort of assumed that it's a primitive belief that there might be some mind or creator behind the universe. And so what I say in the book is, I'm not here to tell you that you need to join my particular church tomorrow, although I would certainly like it if you did. And come on by, we've got cookies. But tell
us which church, where we're going.
Great, come on over to the Presbyterian church. But that's not the point of the book. I mean, the book does not say you should join this or that sect. It doesn't even really say you should be this or that religion, although I personally have an opinion about that. What it says is, you and I and everyone is already acting like there is some highest good in the world. You can see it in the way people treat science, for instance. You know, when Fauci says, "I represent the science. I stand in for some kind of occult wisdom that is a source of ethical knowledge." He's not actually doing science. He's telling you that he's a priest, a cleric. And what we're doing here is we're just constantly reaching out for some higher purpose, some higher power, because that's how we're built. That's what we are. And I just propose in the book that we should be honest about that and turn to an older and wiser way of answering that question than just, "I represent the science," or whatever else.
Yeah, it's like when I hear environmentalists say the same thing, and it almost becomes a religion in and of itself. You know, it's not just about protecting the earth; it's about like a belief system that you have to belong to. And
yes,
I saw that even with the mask wearing. The mask wearing went beyond the logic to the I'm wearing a mask, therefore I am a Democrat. I don't know what it was.
Oh,
it
yeah.
Was like, I'm going to wear this mask, and you're going to know how I feel about the vaccine and about me being, it just morphs into a higher belief than just the basic science. So you're absolutely right. The fifth and final part of this book
is the crisis of the regime. Yes. And that is the crisis of our nation. I mean, it's kind of
That's
like
it.
we've been on this journey in the book through these big questions that take us back into, 5th century BC Athens and 8th century BC Jerusalem and through Greek and Hebrew. And eventually we have to come back to America, because that's what I believe kind of represents the culmination of a lot of these ideas. Our founding fathers did sort of create this country with the intention of carrying forward the traditions of classical antiquity and installing this Judeo-Christian belief in the creator God who makes us, endows us with certain inalienable rights, right? And it certainly looks as if that whole experiment is kind of on rocky ground, that we're having these terrible problems. The fact that you would even need to write a book like How to Save the West kind of already suggests like what's going wrong. And so one of the things I argue in the book is there's actually resources for dealing with that question too in the West. We can go back and look at people like Herodotus and Polybius. Even Aristotle has stuff to say about this, that teach us, what the problem is. And I end up by saying the problem is a breakdown of what's called civic friendship, civic love, philia in Greek. The antidote to this is, well, the source of this problem is effectively identity politics, is effectively like dividing ourselves up, not into Americans, but into this or that sexuality, this or that gender, this or that race, what have you. Even like when Joe Biden talks about a pandemic of the unvaccinated, think about what it means that the president is calling some of the population tantamount to a disease, right? That kind of acid corrodes republics. And the solution to it is local engagement in real life, in the here and now, with one another. You're seeing this happen in some states now. I think Florida is a great model for it personally, but it's not the only one. I live out here in Nashville, and, knowing your neighbors, doing things with them, asking not like big abstract questions about what the country should do, but about what you guys should do in your communities. How should your schools be run? And the battle to take ownership over those local spaces is kind of the most important political fight I think we face. And the ancient political philosophers can help us, I think, to approach it and to understand the urgency of it.
Bingo. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I've been at meetings, talking to folks, different people working on different projects across the country. And I keep saying, if we go back to our children, we can find common ground, even if we have political differences, which in every nation, historically, on modern, doesn't matter.
Yep.
In the future, I can predict that we will have differences. I don't need to be, somebody with a crystal ball. But if we just find things that we can have common ground on, we can start to rebuild those relationships. I think for so many of us, the fear is, wow, have we become so divisive? There are some people that they're just like, I never want to talk to you again. You supported Trump. I never want to talk to you again. You are, you love Biden. I don't know. It's a very, politically divisive climate that we're in. What would be the advice, Spencer, because I want to bring you back on. You are awesome. Great. I even wrote this. He is great. Like, I told my producers, you know what? I don't care. 20 minutes. I don't care. Like, I want to hear him out. I want to hear it out because Fantastic. I'm having moments here. I think everybody who's listening to this too, and all of my listeners, we really need to hear this, that we are not out there by ourselves, guys. Spencer wrote this book for a reason. We're all wondering, like, are we in a crisis? What's going on? How can I help my child? What can we do to make our world a better, happier place for us? Where can we find some contentment? And I think that when we talk about these ideas, we go, you know what? I feel so good. A weight's lifted off my shoulders because I'm not the only one thinking that we are in a crisis mode. We're not out there by ourselves. So what can we do, Spencer, before you get off, before I let you back into the halls of Nashville with the great food and the Grand Ole Opry and out on your own?
The hot chicken and the country music.
Hot chicken and country music. I love that. I love Nashville. So what?
It doesn't get better.
No, you're
Well,
right.
right. I think what you said is really true, and it's a real problem that many of us have lost friends in the last couple years, especially. I know I have, or have had rocky moments with friends, and actually, that is an interesting. Now that I'm thinking about it, as I say it out loud, I'm realizing I'm not sure that I've lost any friends. I think I've had to have some really hard conversations,
Right.
and the fact that we had those conversations is going to be, I think, the key to the answer that I want to give to your question. And in the book, I say you might discover as you reach out that a Democrat is actually not a kind of person, and neither is a Republican. These are names and that we apply to ourselves, important names for groups that we affiliate with, and we have to talk about those differences. But one of the surprising things you find when you log off of social media and you actually talk to people is that if you're confident and courageous, if you step out in faith that the truths you believe are in fact true and you're not alone in them, that they come down from many centuries of thinking and talking about these issues. And if you present those truths with love and with a true desire to make things better, you'll find that you actually way more allies than you expect. And again, I'm going to talk about Florida because I think it's such an interesting case study in this. There's a governor in DeSantis who just came out and said everything you're not supposed to say, everything that, even Republicans are a little bit like, don't talk about wokeness. Like that's kind of divisive culture war stuff. And what happened? Everybody I don't care what race, everybody kind of pricked up their ears. And it's not that everybody agreed, but there were a lot of people that we would be taught by our media, oh, those people are going to be very offended by what you've said. A lot of people actually said, you know what, something's got to give. And I want to live in at least in reality, at least in like a world where men are men and women are women. And like, you can protect your kids from all this terrible influence. And I think that is reflective of what can be true for us too in our smaller spheres, that when you actually say with some confidence that you want to live in reality and who can help me to figure that out, you're going to find a lot more friends than you think you are.
Absolutely. I could not have said that better myself. I agree wholeheartedly. I think we have to have the courage to just not be afraid and to do it with kindness and speak up and protect our children, protect our communities, protect our nation. There is nothing wrong with being proud that you are from one of the greatest civilizations that has ever existed on planet Earth, and that is the United States of America. And by the way, you're absolutely right. We should spend more time learning from those that have already lived through these rough and difficult times. They may not have had Twitter or, or the type of technology that we have today, but they had something. They had the town crier. They had different people. They had people in politics and politicking and philosophers and teachers, and everybody had their own ideas, but we don't need to reinvent the wheel necessarily. We just need to learn from them so that we can excel as a species, and a beautiful one at that. Thank you so much, Spencer,
Right.
for being a part of the show.
Oh, Sarah, it's been a delight. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you.
Hi, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel today. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you again real soon. I want to talk to you about My Pillow, but you're not going to want to go away because we're going to be talking about disinformation, yes, and how certain NGOs are set up to literally destroy conservative media. We're going to be talking about that in a minute. But first, I want to go to My Pillow and Mike Lindell. And Mike Lindell has suffered this himself. They have tried to silence him. They have gone after him because of his beliefs, because of what he speaks about. But he is a conservative. He loves America, and he has a company that believes in American ingenuity and American products. That is why I buy My Pillow. That is why all of the bed sheets, the pillows in our house, everything is My Pillow. And I want to offer you something special with Mike Lindell, right? You can buy right now, buy one, get one free on My Pillow 2.0. All you have to do is use the promo code Carter. That's CARTER. Brand new temperature regulating technology that keeps you comfortable throughout the night. New fabric dissipates the heat and that humidity that you'll get on your pillow sometimes to create a cooling sensation to maintain a cooler surface temperature when you're sleeping. It is a huge difference. It is an amazing pillow. And now for a limited time, when you buy one MyPillow 2.0, you get another one free with code Carter, CARTER. Go to mypillow.com for MyPillow 2.0. Buy one, get one pricing plus discounts on your favorite MyPillow products like towels, sheets, slippers, and more by using code Carter. Stay cool and sleep better with the MyPillow 2.0 buy one, get one free sale going on now at mypillow.com, promo code Carter, mypillow.com, promo code Carter. So I don't know if y'all had a chance to look at this, but there is a great story in the Washington Examiner. It is by Gabe Kaminsky. I have talked about this writer before. I think he is phenomenal. Really an incredible investigative piece. It's Disinformation Inc. And I've talked about disinformation so many times on this podcast, but this one really puts it into perspective. Meet the groups hauling in cash to secretly blacklist conservative news. Meet the groups. Think about the headline. Hauling in cash to secretly blacklist conservative news. These are nonprofit groups that are literally targeting conservative news outlets. Even the Washington Examiner, which I used to work for and I had a column with, they're being targeted. Listen to this. Major ad companies are increasingly seeking guidance from purportedly nonpartisan groups claiming to be detecting and fighting online disinformation. You guys, we do not need the disinformation board. But you know why they're doing it? They're doing it this way. It's like with my website, sarahuckabee.com, right? Like anything. They want to limit the amount of ads. They want to threaten advertisers or tell advertisers that, either sarahuckabee.com or Fox News or the Washington Examiner or the Federalist or, any of these great conservative outlets. Yeah, you know what? I wouldn't advertise with them. They haven't fit into the model that we have set up for clarity on reporting. They have a global disinformation index, a global one. So when the advertisers hear that and they're like, oh, okay, now I'm kind of nervous. I don't want to put my ads there. They'll go and put the ads in the left, right? The New York Times, ProPublica, which is all the way to the left, and other groups like that. So that we end up suffering. Let me read this to you just so you understand. This Global Disinformation Index, which is a British group, with two affiliated U.S. nonprofit groups sharing similar board members, is one entity shaping the ad world behind the scenes. So think about this. You've got the British group and you've got two U.S. nonprofits. They all share the same board members. They're one entity and they are trying to shape news and information based on advertising dollars that are going to those and not going to other news organizations. GDI discloses in reports which outlets identify as the riskiest and the worst offenders for peddling disinformation. Just listen to this. These 10, which all skew to the right, are the American Spectator, Newsmax, the Federalist. By the way, look at what happened to Newsmax. Look at what's happened to One America News. Being dropped, from the cable networks. That is just insanity. They want to limit what you're able to see. They think they know what's best for you. American Conservative, The Blaze, which I used to work for, The Daily Wire, which is a great news source, Real Clear Politics, great Reason, and guess what? The New York Post. So think about this. If the New York Post did not exist, if the New York Post could not get advertising dollars and did not exist, we would never have found out about the Hunter Biden laptop story. Think about this. When I was at Circa News in Sinclair, if we did not exist, because they consider Sinclair as well, Circa is gone now. But all those stories that John Solomon and I wrote on the Russia hoax, every single story that we broke that is now leading to these investigations on the weaponization of our bureaucracy, they would have never been written. None of them. But listen to this. On the flip side, this is what Gabe wrote. On the flip side, all of these websites that GDI ranks as the least risky lean left in their news coverage, minus the Wall Street Journal. These include NPR, ProPublica, the Associated Press, Insider, the New York Times, USA Today, the Washington Post. Let's talk a little bit about those in a minute. BuzzFeed News, HuffPost, according to a 27-page report. I want to tell you something that you probably all don't know, but they were chided by Columbia Review. This is the Washington Post for their stories when they tried to go against John Solomon and I. Remember that? Remember that? When they tried to go against John Solomon and I, and they won the Pulitzers for saying that President Trump was a Russian stooge, when we can see with a lot of evidence that probably the Manchurian candidate is in the White House right now. So the Washington Post, let's go back to that. The panel that awarded the Pulitzer Prizes to the New York Times and Washington Post for reporting related to all of that Trump-Russia collusion that John Solomon and I broke the truth on. We actually wrote the truth for a smaller news outlet, of course, Circa, much smaller, Sinclair huge, but Circa was much smaller than those outlets, are now facing scrutiny following publication of a 4-part series in the Columbia Journalism Review documenting the establishment media pillars' lapses for their claimed journalistic standards. Columbia Journalism Review just destroyed them. And everyone's really quiet on that. Nobody wants to admit that because the 19-member Pulitzer Prize board was comprised of journalists, professors, writers, and staff members. Listen to this from the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's all a setup. So thank you, Gabe Kaminsky. Thank you for your story, getting that out there. It is the truth. These entities are trying to silence us, folks, and we will not allow that to happen. Eventually, the truth comes out. Eventually, these people are exposed. And eventually, in the end, we document the real history so that these mistakes, hopefully, are never repeated again. Thank you so much for being a part of the Sara Carter Show. Follow me on Truth at Sara Carter Official, Twitter at Sara Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless our great nation. And God bless the great state of Texas.